Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this Sunday morning. I'm very happy to have my co-hosts with me, the lovely Wendy Morris. And Wendy, how are you doing
Hello.
today?
I'm doing pretty good this bright and early morning. How are you, Chrissy?
uh, I I suck on my coffee in a big thing. So yeah, I think I got this. So, who is our guest today?
Well, today is a friend of mine. His name is Sam, also known as Bo Thompson Haynes, and he wrote a book on metal magic, and he's a very interesting man. Also a devotee of the Morrigan, and that's how I met him. Just a lovely person and a wealth of knowledge.
Well, let's bring our guest up then. Hey, Sam.
Hey, I've got my coffee in a sippy cup, so I'll just...
Well, it's kind of like a sippy cup in a way. It has a straw, so drinking coffee from a straw. I don't know how good that is, but it works. So Sam, can you talk about yourself? I mean, we know who you are, but why don't you let the audience know who you are?
Well, I started out as a child. Well, maybe we don't want to go back that far, but I'm right now. My path is magical blacksmithing, and metal magic, and it's a path that I was kind of led to through my work with the Morrigan. And a lot of people don't associate her in blacksmithing, but I have found a lot of similarities that blend really well with the two. And it was just something that, as I've been a smith for 14, 15 years, was doing it full time, probably for the last, 5 or so. Most of my work is commissioned work. And it has been very interesting to reconnect, and that's a word that I'm going to use, because I think I have personally I have a struggle with people that use long lost anything, because I just think we've just misremembered most of the stuff. I don't think it's lost. I think we've just become disconnected. And I think with my work with metal and the magic that it brings has enabled me to have a much deeper connection to my surroundings. And I learned, because I started getting these thoughts on metal magic, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go look up this, right? And I'm gonna go look for information, and there's not any out there, other than irons aligns with Saturn, or what. I don't do the astrologist, that may not even be wrong, right? But it was just real vague, kind of just right along the surface, and I was like, okay, well, there's got to be more to this. Studying the lore that I did, because I'm real big into Irish mythology, and as much as I studied the lore and read it, there's a lot of active metal magic involved in the Irish lore, and where they are animate objects. It's not just, they actually move. And being an animist, I thought that was very intriguing, and I started looking at other cultures around the world, and everybody has a similar thought, right? A similar practice, a similar mythology. And the more I started piecing things together, I go, okay, well, there's something here, right? And then once I probably the most important thing that I noticed, I'm not going to say discovered, because it was already there, but for me, that came to life, was that we do have that intimate connection to metal. It's already a part of us. And I don't think the big misnomer is that you got to be a blacksmith in order to work metal magic. And I just think that's so wrong. It's not, let me say it this way, it is not how I look at it in my practice. I don't teach it that way. I don't think you necessarily need it, because you already have an intimate connection. We already have iron in our blood. Find me somebody that has no iron in their blood, and most likely they're not going to be upright, right?
Right.
we have copper in our blood because we need copper within our intestinal tracts to absorb the iron. You can't absorb the iron without the copper. We have tin, right? So you put tin and copper together, and now you have bronze, right? And we have zinc, right? Because you get a cold, first thing you want to do is overload on zinc, right? Because we have zinc, and you do zinc and copper, and now you've got brass. You know, so you already have a physical, intimate connection to a lot of these objects and metals, and we just have forgotten it. And you know, when there's so much of it, and there's a plethora of it, you don't even notice it anymore. You know, and the book, I take people through a journey of reconnecting with the metal that you already have. You know, it's all over your house. You don't even see it. So that, I guess that's my journey. You know, how's that? Is that a good intro?
That's very good. So how did you get started on your spiritual path?
Gosh. It probably started back, you know, in the late 80s. Because I would be on maneuvers, be in the field. I was stationed in West Germany right before the first desert thing happened. You know, we didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't, you know, a lot of things we take for granted now we didn't have, so we read, right? And I started reading, you know, books of whatever the PX was carrying. And I read a book, and this was going to be one of those books that everybody hates, you know, but it got me to where I am, right? Which is the Bradley book, right? The Myths of Avalon, you know. And it was one of those things. What if, you know, wouldn't it be cool if something like that was real, right? And then the more I started looking at it, and the more I saw, and it kind of got me started. And I was, you know, started with the Scott Cunninghams back in the early 90s. You know, who we have, what do we have? Silver Raven Wolf, there was Cunningham, there was a few others, you know, Buckland, and, you know, and just kind of, you know, in the aisle of Barnes and Noble, hoping nobody saw me because I'm in, you know, I'm in the South, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, yeah, you know, Baptists don't even get along down here, right? So and that's kind of how I started. It was just more of a what if, and it just kind of, it made sense to me, and it resonated with me. And you know, I started out, you know, on a Wiccan path, which, you know, was kind of the gateway drug, I think, for a lot of other practices. And I've just, you know, I've been thinking those thoughts, you know, learning, dabbling, experimenting, you know, for a while, a couple of days anyway. Does that answer your question? Was there something I?
No, that answered the question. Yeah. So yeah, in the South, I'm not really in the South. I'm in the Midwest, but close enough. I mean, I just moved back to Iowa, so it's the very strict, heavy Bible Belt area. So, but I'm always out there. So people knows me. Take it to who I am. That's all. So yeah, I know the feeling when you go to Barnes and Noble, you kind of look around like somebody watching me. So,
Yeah, and I always put it on the self-help aisle, right?
yeah.
So, you know, am I studying about, you know, some kind of tantric wisdom, you know, or am I looking at witchcraft? You know,
That's true.
you know, it depends on which way you're facing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or take another book and put it underneath the book you're actually looking at. So yeah, I've done that before too. So, what is metal magic? Can you explain to us from your book, Metal Never Lies? So what is that magic?
To me, metal magic is more about having an ally, right? Because I think of you know, being an animist, you know, we think of, you know, trees having separate consciousness, and then, you know, my beloved's an herbalist, so she has those plant allies that she works with, and we have a connection with crystals, and, you know, we recognize a lot of folks on a pagan path. I'm using it as an umbrella for, you know, everybody, right? I don't want to leave anybody out. So, well, I mean, you know, I mean, words mean stuff, but I don't want to say something that offends somebody, because I don't, you know, once again, with my study, it wasn't limited to just the Irish, the Norse. Everybody was doing it.
Yeah.
To me, metal magic is basically working with an ally to help you achieve whatever desired results, right? Which is what magic, I think, is. And it's about drawing the larger circle, right? So it's not just you, it's you and, it's a yes and it's about learning the relationship. And I think that's something that is a word in our culture that we have a negative connotation with. We don't. My personal view, right? So this is my filter, is that we're just not really good as a culture about building relationships, right? It's always kind of, flavor of the month. And the thing about whether you're having a relationship with a particular deity, or you're working on your tarot, or you're working on whatever you're working on, you got to have a relationship. And relationships take time, and they take effort, right? I can't have a healthy relationship with my beloved if I only spend 15, 20 minutes a day with her. It's just, I don't think so. In my world, that wouldn't work well. So, I take that same principle to deity. You've got to have more time than just a few minutes of drive by, throw some offerings on the altar to have a deep relationship, right? And the same thing, I think, with metal magic. You've got to be able to sit with the metal. You've got to be able to kind of feel the vibration, understand its consciousness, and make that connection, have that relationship. So to me, metal magic is using that to enhance myself, to make myself stronger, make myself be able to create the I'm having a hard time with words. I'm on my second cup of coffee. To create the outcome that you want, right? So it's no work. I mean, if you're doing a spell, right, you've got these ingredients that you're putting together. I have these. I don't know how everybody does it. So I'm going to talk about me. I have these ingredients that I want to work with, but I want to make sure as I'm doing it that I have an intimate relationship with those ingredients.
Mhm.
I mean, you just don't want to run down to maybe you do, but I don't want to run down to Food Line and just grab some herbs off the shelf and put it all in a thing and make stone soup. And now I've got, a whoop-de-doopy spell. I think for me, I want to have relationships with those things that I'm working with. So I understand the probabilities of outcome, if that makes sense. Being a bit of a chaos witch,
Absolutely.
I'm being an Appalachian chaos witch. It makes things a little different, right? Because I mean,
Right.
I'm not opposed to just taking some dirt and spitting them in my hand, and now I've got some magic, right?
Right.
But to me, metal magic is having a relationship with something that's other than yourself to have a desired outcome. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we build relationships through time. Like, if I do candle magic a certain way and I work with these herbs all the time doing these certain spells, then I build that relationship with that ingredient, that piece that needs to be into the spell,
And you have that comfortability, knowing that when I'm doing this is going to work because I have that relationship and I have that experience to
the
where it does work.
confidence.
I have that. Yes, you have that applied knowledge.
Right.
And I absolutely love that. And that's what we do these podcasts, is to educate everybody out there, So just what you just said, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience be like, wow, they probably didn't think of it that way. Maybe they have, maybe they do the same thing. So I really love the way you said that. It was point on.
Well, I think we
Yeah.
overlook it sometimes. We get so, I mean, we're in an instant gratification culture. I mean, we're pissed off when Amazon won't deliver our package in 2 days, right? I mean, we want stuff now, right?
Yes.
And I think because of that, we've lost sight, on a lot of the connections, the things that make life worth living, right?
Mhm.
Are connections. I mean,
Or we think we have to have something from somewhere else when it might be right in our front door too, You could go out in your backyard and find a bunch of stuff that you can use just as well and is
if not
probably
better.
better.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
not better. And I'm a big
Yeah.
proponent of crafting, because I think, as much as that you can make, all right, now, this is me talking about myself because I make a living on making things for others, right? So, but I also think there's a lot of value in being able to make things yourself, because you're putting that thing that nobody else can do into your work, right, with a capital W, that only you can do. And I think there's a lot of value in that. That's kind of how I got started with it. I would make a whatever, and somebody, oh, that's cool. Can you make me one of those? And next thing you know, I'm doing it for a living, so to speak. So I think, drive-by magic isn't not a way to survive. It may be a way to live, but I don't think it's a way to survive. I think magic to me is about relationship. Wendy, when we were spending our time together, I mean, I probably said it more than any other. I mean, it's about when you're working with a deity, it's about relationship. It's not what can you do for me. Deities aren't vending machines, right? Put stuff in and get stuff out, right? It doesn't, my experience with deities is that they're not really transactional, right? And we have a transactional culture. And sometimes it's hard to translate that.
I think it's a relationship. Actually, you build a relationship with them. And when you build that relationship, you give to them by you giving your energy, your time, your, whatever
they
words you want
want
to use for it. Some people use devotion, some people use interchanging, whatever word you want to use with it, you build this relationship. And the more you put into the relationship, the more you get out of it. It's not just, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? It's what can I do for you? And in turn, hey, I might need a little help too, back and forth. And so that's kind of the way that I personally work with my deity, and we have the same deity that we work with. And it's, sometimes it's like, get away from me. I'm not going to help you now. You figure it out on your own. It's not being ugly. It's just like, this is not worth my time. You can figure this out yourself, and other times it's not that way at all. It just depends. And like you said, it's not a vending machine thing. It's like, okay, it's like, sometimes I get, why are you wasting my time with this? This is something you can do yourself, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Maybe there are, some deities might be a little more gentle. Some are not, but, you do what you build your own relationship. It's a personal thing. So, and that kind of leads into the next question, actually.
Yes, it does.
is how does Morrigan fit into your metal magic practice? How does she fit in there? What does she?
Well, that's a question I asked myself. I was like, okay, how do you, why this? Why not, Bridget? Why not Govnu? Right? If you're looking at it from an Irish pantheon. And then I once I started actually studying on her some and found out her parentage, right? Because Delbeth, who her father is, translates into shaped by fire or fire shaper or work with fire, something like that. And I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of blacksmithy, right? I mean, you got to have fire, that's important. And then her mother, Ernmus, was Iron Death by iron, depending on the translation. One thing I learned about translations, it depends who's translating it. So iron and fire, that's kind of blacksmithy to me. And it just kind of, and then you throw in, her being, one of the sorceress of the whole tribe, right? The Tua de Danann, that all works together for me. So that's how it, that's, to me, it makes sense, right? In my relationship.
One more thing you might think about too is she's a shapeshifter, and what do you do when you change metal? You reshape it.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And like I said, it just, to me, it just, I'm okay with that. That works for me.
Makes sense.
It's like,
it really makes sense.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You put it that way. Yeah.
And when and how did you become a devotee to herself?
Yeah, that's I was actually sitting, it's one of those things where you remember the time and date and all the smells, and it was one of those type events. I was sitting on our side porch in the evening, just kind of just dusk, fireflies were coming out, that kind of thing, and very clearly, she showed up. Wasn't like a burning bush or anything like that. It just kind of felt a presence. Yeah, I don't have it like that, right? So I'm low budget. And she, just I have work for you to do. And I'm like, no, you don't. I knew enough about her to know, no, this is not the droid you're looking for. And we did this for about 6 months. She kind of kept showing up. I just knew who it was. I don't know how I knew. I just knew. And until finally, I was like, all right, let's let's roll with it. Back then, because this was 7-8 years ago, longer than that. I don't even. I lost track. It's been a while ago. And there wasn't a whole lot of information. Once again, wasn't a whole lot of information out there on her. And some of the information I got was kind of sketchy. Once again,
A lot of it was sketchy back then.
Well, I try to, have a benefit of the doubt. Everybody's doing the best they can. A lot of times, some of it's just false, and people getting bad information. If you're going to, write that down, you probably want to research it a little bit. But I try to, no judgment. I don't, it's all I can do to keep between the ditches myself. I don't need to add that on to anybody else, right? So, but I did find out the more I knew, the more it was easier to understand what others didn't know, right? And even with my relationship with her, has changed over the years. She has corrected me over the years.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Know that one. Got that.
And right now, full disclosure, we're at a bit of an impasse right now because I'm just trying to figure myself out, and I'm having space to do that, right? But it's not there's not any she's not helping me, yada yada. There's none of that stuff. It's just this is just a time for me to do my own work, and sometimes you have to do that, and that I think it is hard for us as humans because we want the easy answers. We don't want to do. I have found for myself that I don't really want to do the work a lot of times, because the work is hard.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if it was easy, somebody else be doing it, right? So, and it's hard, and I don't know that I wouldn't change it, really. I mean, I've been through, she's put me through the ringers, but she's helped as much as she's hurt, right? And even the hurt is a good hurt because it provides growth, right? Growth is hard. Growth isn't easy. Growth is falling down, skidding your knee, knowing that you don't run that fast. You know what I mean? I mean, these lessons that you have to learn, and the only way to learn them is to experience them. When it goes back to what we've been talking about, you got to have the relationship because you got to have the understanding of this is part of the process. This is part of the work, and the hardest thing that for me to learn was that it was part of it, that I had to get myself right before I could help anybody else, and I was the only one that could do that. I couldn't, someone else couldn't do my push-ups. Right.
Right.
I had to do them. And I think some of that is just being, Gen X to where I'm hard-headed. I mean, I've survived garden hose, so I've been drinking water out of the garden hose for, half a century, and here I am. So, yeah, did that answer your question? I just got to go off on a ramble. Sorry. I
No, it absolutely did. I'm right there with you. I remember the first time, actually, I was kind of stupid. I made a deal with somebody I didn't know that well, and I've been with her ever since. It's been over 30 years for me. And
I didn't know you could put stipulations on it. Yeah, no, I didn't know that you could add
No,
guardrails.
yeah. Yeah,
You
I've
know,
had
now people are
to
putting clauses in
recontract
the
multiple
contract and all
times.
this kind of stuff. I'm just like, you know, I'm gonna
Yeah,
get.
I've had to recontract multiple times because originally I said, "Hey, if you help me with this, I will be your devotee," you know, and that was very open-ended. I will, I'm yours. And you know, and I went to her not quite understanding who she was. I just thought she was a female warrior. And being a female veteran, I wanted somebody to relate to,
Mhm.
what that's like to be a warrior and a female veteran that was in combat support. So, combat arms and combat support. I was artillery. So I was like, okay, what goddess will relate to me, relate to the fact that I'm so fierce about protecting those that I love, and I'm so fierce about my people, and I'm so fierce about all of these things. And so that's what drew me to her at first. I didn't realize all the other flavors that she has, all the other layers to her, and the deepness that and enrichment that she has. Um, and I'm very passionate about her. And I wax and wane too, Sam, with it. I have to take breaks and walk back, and I think she's perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
She's always there a little bit. I can always hear those wings on the wind just a little bit behind me. But, I do small services for her. I do a vessel. I become her vessel at one of our festivals out here, and we have a ritual where I completely go away. She takes over and she talks to the people. And I have no idea what she says when she says it. People come back to me and they'll ask me like, "Hey," and I'm like, "That was not me," you know. And it's very interesting how I change. My whole even physicality changes when I do that. Um, but yeah, she's a lot, and don't worry about going back and forth and taking a
Yeah.
break. That's perfectly
Yeah,
that's
I'm
perfectly
not. She's
yeah.
got dibs. I know that. It's just, it's my stuff, right? I
When
just
she
have to
wants
figure
you,
it
she'll
out.
go
Yeah, I'm not.
get you
Yeah,
back.
I'm not concerned.
Okay.
But,
All right.
yeah, if you know, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. So what inspired the piece that you have in the book, A Warrior Queen? I mean, how did you become involved in that project?
I actually tried to get out of that project. To be honest, I had a friend of mine that said, "Hey, this is you're right up your alley. You need to submit, an article." I'm like, I'm like I said, I'm deep Appalachian. I went to college long enough to know that I can't do that, right? So I just,
Mhm.
don't really have the education. Thank God for spell check, right? Because I don't speak English. I've been there. I don't sound anything like them. So it was, writing is a different language, because we don't write the way that we talk, right? And so at first I said, I don't want to do that because that's hard. Because I got, I'm gonna have to show my vulnerability of not being educated, right? Because that's a big thing, right? And so I said, okay, it's Girl God books. So this is an easy out. So I wrote the editor and said, I'm a guy. Somebody told me that they, wanted me to submit it, but I understand that this is more of a feminine type thing, and I'll be okay with you saying you don't want my piece. And then she wrote back and said, no, we'd love to have it. It's like, now I got to write it, and that's kind of, it's like, I don't want to do that. I don't know. That's writing. No, because you write something down and it's permanent.
Mhm.
And it's out there. It's like I've talked to people that have written books, a decade ago and go, I don't know what I was, at the time, that's where I was, but I'm not there now, but people read that and that's what they understand of me now. And I'm not the same person that I was then, but there's that disconnect. Right.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved with it. It was like, okay, well, it's just, and then that led to me meeting a bunch of people that enabled me to help write the book, because my book was definitely a group community effort. Because I think start to finish to publication, I did my book in about 6 months.
How long does it take you to write a book? Because I've been trying to do one for years.
You know what, mine was just one of those. It was just I don't have any other way to say it. It was just divinely inspired. I didn't want to write it, you know, but it was like, you know, you're going to do this because there's nobody's got any information on it. So, you know, I guess you're going to do it. And, you know, she would wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, because I have, you know, a deadline that she kind of gave me, you got to write every day. And I wouldn't write because I got busy. I didn't have time, yada, yada, yada. And 3 o'clock, she'd wake me up. Well, you're not doing anything now. You know, why you know, go write, you know. So I spent, you know, 4 hours every day from 3 to 7 or whatever writing. And that's, you know, I don't know anything about putting a book together. You know, I just, you know, was just kind of at it and shared it with people that I knew and trusted, and, you know, and they give me feedback and whittled and added and whatever. It's, you know, it was just one of those things. Everything worked out really, really well. That's why I say it was kind of divinely inspired, because, you know, I'm not a writer. You know, it was never something that, you know, at any time in my lifetime has said, oh, I want to write a book. I never said that. Never wanted anything like that. Just, you know, because that's work. That's hard. Writing a book is hard. And people that have put out, you know, dozens, you know, and are like Hamilton, you know, just writing like it's going out of style. I don't get it. You know, I'm grateful for them. You know, but I don't get it. I don't have the thought process for that. Thankfully.
That's hard.
Yeah,
Well,
I would let me say it this way. I would very much not like to write another book.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm not going to. I would just really strongly like to not.
Yeah. I know I get up every morning about 3 o'clock for just a few hours. So I don't know why. I'm always told it's a witching hour. So I'm always trying to think what is going on, who's going to come and visit me or something. Maybe it's just the spirits telling me to do that book. So I might start doing that instead of just staying up. Can you tell us about Raven's Keep Forge, when you started it, and what types of things do you sell? And do you sell any forge items? If so, do you have a website that someone can order from?
Okay. Well, it started out when I first started learning how to do it. I learned it kind of in a primitive style, literally, and I teach it this way every few years. We just literally just dig a hole in the ground and we'll forge in the ground. I mean, because as a species, we've been forging since before the Copper Age, right? So it's not a new process, you know, and we really haven't changed it any. You know, we still get it hot and we still hit it hard. You know, we may change it from, you know, charcoal or coal or propane, or, you know, we may change the size of which we're doing it, but it's still the same thing. I first started getting into it because I wanted to pay respect to my ancestors. I remember growing up and everybody had a forge, a little smithy, because you didn't go run down and go buy something new. You fixed what you had, you know. Because I remember ordering tennis shoes from Sears and Roebuck, and it taking a month for me to get tennis shoes, you know. And by then they were the wrong size, because, you know, being a kid, you're growing so quick, right? So it's not something that, you know, it was almost a bad thing if you had to buy something new, you know, because you couldn't fix what you had well enough. You know, you weren't good enough to fix it. You had to go buy something new. So it was kind of almost a badge of honor to fix it. And being, you know, Appalachian, we just, you know, we have our own engineering structure, right? So, and I remember that very fondly. My grandfather's, you know, would, you know, fix a shovel, fix a hatchet, fix whatever tool that he needed. And I wanted to honor that. And I started looking at the cost of learning how to do that. And it's, you know, it can be very unaffordable. And so I was thinking, okay, well, you know, that's not going to work. And I found out about this school up in, at the time it was in Western North Carolina, and it was like a week-long immersion. And I was like, okay, well, I can do that, you know. So did that, and I just kind of took to it like a duck to water. It was just my jam. It's like I felt, when you do something, you go, okay, yeah, this is me. I'm comfortable. Everything kind of clicks, and the heavens open up and the angels sing, and it wasn't quite that elaborate, but it was very much that. And then it kind of morphed, and I started making just stuff around the house, nails, hooks, and just usable things, right? And then to where now it's morphed into more of metal magic work, to where I do have a limited amount of things on the website, which is ravenskeepforge.com. But like I said, most of my work is commissioned work. I'll make wands for folks, or I'll make scribes in particular. And I've got amulets and talismans and bracelets and pendants and yada yada yada. I do make knives and athames, that kind of thing. It's not my preferred thing, but I do for special occasions. I do make that kind of thing. Most of the work now is usually it's kind of a conjunction, right? So if you commission me to make something, you and I would work together. We can do this at a particular time. You can be doing your work while I'm doing my work, right? So that way, you can kind of infuse at the same time, if you want to, or I can just, let her roll with it, which is a lot of the work is just, I go to work and I have something, I've become kind of an active spectator. I don't know how to explain it. It's all sacred forged. My work, I make everything in the smithy, right? As far as I'll use charcoal, but I make my own charcoal. I get the trees, they're already fallen, and I split, cut, stack. I cook the charcoal, right? And that's before I've actually forged anything, so it takes a lot of back end process to work, and so everything that happens within the smithy, I have a very intimate connection with. Even the metal, 90 some odd percent easy, is all scrap metal. So I'm repurposing, right? And I think that's kind of cool because, for instance, as I was making an athame for someone and they were doing, needing it for specific work, and I used an old hay tine, right? Where if you're not familiar with agriculture, after you cut hay, you got to rake it into rows. So then you can bale it or roll it up, whatever preferred method that you're doing. But it takes these little metal tines back behind the tractor that rakes it, right? So you rake it into a row, and they're kind of springy a little bit as metal goes, springy. But it's a great tool steel, right? Because there's like 3,500 different grades of steel. We don't have time for all that. So it's tool steel, right? It makes good tools. And and I thought, well, that's really kind of cool because this farmer used this hay to feed cattle or horse or whatever, to feed his family, and I'm repurposing that life into this life. That now that you can use to help this person can help their family with something. So it's that continuation of that energy. And being able to listen to the metal and hear the stories, and knowing that it's not just a widget, it's a living thing, right? It's no different to me than crystals or herbs or whatever. Everything's connected, right? So yes, long answer to yes, I do make things. There are on the website. I do have some things that are out there. I make divination tools, all that kind of stuff. Just if I don't have it, ask me and we'll see about making it.
Awesome. Very good. Oh.
Okay. I see that you actually do workshops at your smith or your forge. Can you talk about what you teach and how one could take your workshops?
Okay. I usually do offer two types of workshops. One is primitive blacksmithing, which is kind of what I'm doing up at Temple Fest this year. It's the first time I've done anything like that at a pagan gathering. Usually I'll do primitive blacksmithing, just because people want to learn how to do it affordable. So I teach that, where we make bellows, and it's all very much hands-on. It's physically demanding. because I'm getting you to split your own wood and all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of fun if you're into that kind of thing. And then the other one is Magical Blacksmithing, which I usually run a couple of times a year in the spring and the fall, because it's just too bloody hot in the summer over a fire. It's just, no, I don't want to do that, so anyway, and then we learn actually how to connect with the metal, that I have available, and I work with you on shaping, creating whatever it is that you came about. It's really kind of fun to see people's transformation, where they take their metal and they go off and kind of sit with it, and what they come back to, and the thoughts and feelings and visions and whatever, how everybody sees things a little differently, and then actually letting the metal, do the work. I think it's an interesting process to see when people show up on Friday and when they leave on Sunday, because they just stay here on site. They camp. We feed them, and it's very much an immersion, when you're, working magic for 3 days. I mean, what could be cooler?
And so you can find how to sign up for that on your website.
Yeah, it's on the website. Yeah, I limit my classes to 6 people, because once again, this was hard, right? I mean, this is kind of a very intimate kind of thing, and I want it to be a point to where people can learn, and I can help teach, right? So it's not a English 101 kind of thing. It's something that I hold space and let people work through what it is they need to work through, to get it. And I think that's, to me, it makes sense doing it that way, because I'm responsible for the information getting to you, and you're responsible for gathering it while you're here. And I want to make sure that you have every possible tool or access to things that you need to create what it is you need to create.
Right. So I also kind of read that people do camping when they're taking that, they camp
We've
on
got
your land. And
we're in the foothills, so we're close to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We're close to Virginia in North Carolina, and so we have about 9 acres where we're at. It's all, for the most part, wooded, and we got camping sites here. People just come and camp out and have a little primitive fun for, because we're in the one location you can't get cell service, so you're remote.
Always.
So it's kind of cool, because you come and you're just disconnected, and which is great, because then you don't have to worry about all that other stuff, right? You can catch up on the news when you get done, and chances are it hadn't changed any. It's still a disaster.
Yeah, well, we won't get into that.
Yeah, please don't.
So, are you involved in any other businesses, you and your significant other, or your spouse, or you call her your beloved, which I love that. That is wonderful. And if so, can you tell us about it?
Yeah, my beloved and I have a tea shop in Main Street, USA, right? Down historic Main Street, and she's an herbalist by trade. She did a 3-year apprenticeship herbalist, not one of those I read a book and now I'm an herbalist. Not anything wrong with them. It's just that she's she's gone a couple extra steps. We'll say it that way, and she's been doing it for 14, 15, 13, long time, right? And I'm more the tea guy. I have more of the tea information, and she does more of the herbs. And in our shop, we have kind of a gift sundry kind of place too. We've got, imported olive oils, and everything in there is kind of upcycled, recycled. We're trying really hard to, make sure that we're not adding. We're trying to take something and make it new, which kind of goes back to, repurposing the metal for stuff. And we've been doing that for a couple of years. It helped me, work through my physical challenges, because I could do that versus not doing the smithing over the last couple of years because of it. So it's all loose tea, loose herbs. It's all fresh. We buy small, we blend small. We, probably 60, 70% of the teas we have, we or in-house blends, so you can't get them anywhere else. And we're real proud and we're real picky about what we have, because we think you need the best, right? You deserve
Right.
it, and we don't want to deal with all the fake, right?
Right.
I understand what a fake peach tastes like because I know what a real peach tastes like, and I don't want that.
Can you order online?
Yeah, it's the Grove Teas, GROVE Teas, TEAS.com. The Grove Teas. And we've got all kinds of stuff up there. We do, silly things like stickers, but we got really cool things like, teas. You actually get a better selection online than you do in store because the stuff that we actually don't have room for on the shelf, we still keep in the back for folks. So yeah, I mean, we've got like true, from milk oolong, and organic Ceylon teas, so there's, that all the way up to, fun teas, right? Kids approved teas, so yeah, and it's been, because everybody says, why don't you, pagans, first thing they want to do is open a metaphysical store, it seems like that's the first thing they want to do. And we didn't want to do that. We want to be a part of a community without that part, if that makes sense. Because like I said, we're in a real small area. It's pretty conservative where we are. And I don't need to wear the hubcap, right, to prove who I am. And
Right.
I've found it's a lot easier for people to get to know you and then understand it than me trying to force feed it.
Right.
Everybody has rights. They have a right to believe the way they do, just like I have a right to believe the way that I do. And we've made our store a very welcoming store. And I've told people, I really don't care. I'm selling tea. I don't care. All that other stuff. This is kind of like home base. I don't care what you believe, who you love. I don't care. It's not a, not that I don't care. It's just that doesn't matter to me because we're sharing this, right? That stuff
Right.
out there doesn't matter because we're sharing. I'm serving tea, right?
Right.
And you ought to be able to have time to enjoy tea without having to deal with all that other stuff.
Right.
So that's and I tell I've had some feedback. Some negative feedback on it. I was like, same thing that you, Wendy. I served, I'm a veteran too, and I served for everybody. I didn't
Right.
serve for just the right or just the left or just for the gays or the straights or whatever color you were. There wasn't you only serving for these people. I served for everybody.
Right.
So and that's kind of how our philosophy is at the store. We welcome everybody, but at the same time, everybody's welcome. So we're not going to have any of that other stuff. We're just having tea. Yeah.
Right.
And it's amazing to watch people that get along in our store that wouldn't get along outside our store.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand, right? It's like my philosophy is I won't discuss politics or world events, we'll just put it that way, um, with my pagan friends because this is not worth losing all of my friends and stuff if we have different political or different views. As long as it's not like nobody's harming each other physically, or hurting somebody even emotionally. But you said it right. You have the right to believe whatever you choose to believe, um, as long as it's not physically or emotionally harming someone else.
And I have to ask myself.
There's a line with that, and I don't want to get into the politics
Yeah.
stuff, but there's a
I
line
think
with that.
my litmus test is what's the object of the exercise.
Yeah.
What am I trying to do here? And if I'm trying to create community, then do the things that create community.
Right.
I get a lot more from people that said, well, I thought, I thought pagans did XYZ. You don't seem to be like that. And I'm
Right.
like,
Get to
you're
know me
right, I'm
first
not.
before you judge my belief. Yeah,
Yeah, you're
absolutely.
right.
See,
So
judge my
what to me,
character.
Yeah, it's what's the object of the exercise? You know, is it
Right.
about me or is it about them? You know,
Right.
so
Well, I don't know where Chrissy went, but I'll go ahead and move forward a little bit
okay.
here. Do you have any new projects in the works? Any thought on writing? I know you said you don't want to write another book, but that was
No,
one
I
of
have
my
absolutely
questions.
zero thoughts on writing another book. I briefly kind of thought about it, and then briefly decided I would really like to not do that because yeah, I don't. So I don't have anything in the works for as far as a book goes. Um, as far as the different things, you know, as far as forge wise, you know, I'm working on getting healthier, you know, so I can
Right.
build my strength to get back at it. I am doing something that's really kind of cool and unique, I think, to me, that's is and isn't related to the forge, but I'm doing a lot of incense now. I'm hand rolling incense cones that I'm actually using charcoal from the forge
Oh,
in the
wow.
incense, which I think is really kind of cool. And it's, you know, once again, I was out of commission, so it's like, now what do I do? I'm a maker, right? I have to create stuff. It's just kind of, you know, kind of my personal makeup. And I started, you know, what do I need? Well, I need incense, right? And it started with we have cats, shocker. Um, um,
I
but we had one that would she would get nosebleeds and we found
Right.
out it was from the incense. And I said, well, what is in this? And no incense lists their ingredients. And I'm like, well, if you're not telling me what's in it, it's probably because I don't want to know. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so I ended up saying, okay, well, how do I learn to do this? And I ended up taking a course and doing some experiments and just spending a lot of time. You know, when you don't have anything else to do but lay there, you can do some deep studying, right, to kind of help the day pass. And I got to where I was, you know, making it from ingredients that, you know, we know of. And I was using it mainly because of my devotional, because I would spend, you know, 5 to 10 minutes, you know, every day in devotion. And I wanted something as an offering, right?
Right.
And this worked well for me. You know, it wasn't a room diffuser, right? It was an offering of devotion. And I've gotten into making that and actually making loose incense as well. You know, the resins, mixing the resins. Because I found this really cool little thing called an incense stove, and it's changed my life. Because
Okay.
I didn't like really doing loose incense because it's a pain in the ass,
Yeah,
right?
it
I mean,
is.
you got to get your charcoal lit, and then you got to deal with that smell because I don't care who you are, that doesn't smell good, right? That saltpeter that burns off, right? Your automatic incense, right, from your charcoal
Yeah.
disc. You know, and then you got to let it, you know, sit for 10 or 15 minutes to get the ash before you add anything to it. You know, if not, you'll burn your stuff. And it's just, you know, I mean, it's a thing, right? Not judgment against anybody that's how you want to do it. That's great. But for me to do devotion, that's a lot of work for, you know, 15-minute devotional practice, right? Well, this
Yeah.
incense stove uses a tea light. So you can use your tea light to actually burn your loose incense. And then when you're done, you just blow out the tea light and it quits. You know, so you're not having to burn your disc, you know, for 20, 30 minutes, whatever. Take it outside when you're done. And it doesn't smoke up the house or my room or anything like that. And I like I said, it's changed my life. I love it. It just made my
Yeah.
life so much
And
easier.
do you sell your incense as well?
Yeah, it's available. The loose incense is available at the store, the Grove Teas, and we actually have the incense stoves there too. If you want to get one of those, I've got. Do you want to see what one looks like?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me.
Chrissy, I took question 9 because you weren't there. So
I had
yeah,
a dog out. Yeah.
that's okay.
Oh,
I went
so
on.
part of me is I'm trying to. It's this little gizmo, right? So your
Mm.
tea light, it's right there, and then in the top, I don't know if you can see, it's where the incense goes. I've been burning it, so I've still got stuff in there. And then this is adjustable, so you can adjust it to how much that you want. And then like I said, when you're done, you just blow it out. It's like
That is really cool. That
yeah,
is
as I
really
said, it
cool. I
changed my
may have
life.
to get one of those from you. I
And
may have to do that.
it completely changed my life, because now I've got access to a whole bunch of stuff I didn't have access to before, and like I said, and I just kind of burn it, and I've made my own loose blends as well. So
yeah,
that's what I was doing in between forging. So yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. Yeah. Can you tell us something about yourself that might not be known?
I don't know. I'm pretty open.
I am too.
Not known. Yeah, I don't really know of anything on top of my head, because I'm pretty much, what you see. My granddaddy said, if you don't like this speed, chances are you ain't gonna like the next one either.
Yeah.
Well, we know that you served. We know that you're a veteran. You're a forger. You've got a lot of things going on for you. Yeah. I think you pretty much covered that.
Yeah. The last question I have here is, you will be at Timberfest this year on August 29th to September 1st. And registration ends on July 9th at 10:59 p.m. For anybody out there who would like to go to Timberfest, you better hurry up and get your tickets. But what will you be doing at Timberfest? What kind of workshops will you be doing?
Okay. I'm actually doing 3. And I'll be vending as well. I'm teaching a little play on words. Wendy, you'll appreciate this. It's called Washers at the Forge.
Yeah, I get it.
Where I'm teaching people how to use a washer for metal magic. And we'll kind of talk about that. I'll have a couple of different kinds. I think I'm going to have at least copper and steel washers, and we'll talk about how to make those into different things as far as metal magic. Because magic doesn't need to be expensive. We kind of talked about that earlier, right? So that's one of them. The other one I'm going to be teaching is the inception of metal magic, which is kind of how it kind of came to me, and kind of walk through the process a little bit to see if they connect to it, right? Because not everything's for everybody, right? It's like I have some tarot cards, but I'm not a tarot guy, right? It just doesn't speak to me. I'm an oracle deck guy. Yeah, just because some of it's kind of Capricorn. I just tell me, on a scale of yes to no, and I'm an asshole. Let me know right away. I don't need to. So anyway. I'm teaching that one, and then I'm actually going to do a class on primitive blacksmithing, which I've never done in an event like this, because I'm actually taking my mobile forge, and we'll be doing demos one day with that too. So I'm excited about it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Wow,
sounds like it.
Yeah.
A lot of these folks I've known for a long time. Because I've been, those of you when did you been around? Remember Paganet?
Yeah.
Paganet News. Yeah. So I've met people from way back then when we got our news in paper, before, that was Witchbox time,
Oh yeah. I remember Witchbox. Really. Is Witchbox even around anymore?
No, I think they retired it.
Yeah. Oh, they were. Yeah, I think they retired a long time ago, about 7 years ago, probably 5 or 7. So
I haven't seen anything about that, but that's how I used to connect with people. Believe it or not,
it was the only way to connect.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're having a meetup, at Barnes and Nobles or at the Waffle House, or we'd have those pagan meetups.
Yeah.
Wow, the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. I think we tell everybody our age though here. So.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. I think I'm the oldest one in here. So,
but yeah, Selena told me about you coming to Timberfest, because we did a segment on the festival, because we was doing.
She's been fantastic.
Yeah.
It's
so
that whole
she's
group
really
I've known.
She's
I've known
very
a lot
excited.
of them for a long time. And when I did the fundraiser for Western North Carolina, Christopher actually gave a talk for us that we use for part of our fundraiser. So I'm a big fan of everybody that's involved with that. I've been a fan of Christopher's for a long time. I remember when he first came out with his Inner Temple, and
Mm-hmm.
what was it? It was not Micro. Instant Magic was the name of it. So I mean, this is gosh, 15 years ago. 50. I mean, he's been writing for a long time. So
Oh yeah.
and here's the thing: I don't agree with everything that he writes, and that's okay. I don't hate him. And I think that's one of the things that we need to get over ourselves. You run into somebody that you disagree with, and all of a sudden it's you hate each other. Why? I don't understand that. Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I hate you. I don't understand that.
Well, I know
Right.
we're working on a book about because we've been in the community for 27 years, so we doing a book about community coven work, and the good, the bad, the ugly. So I'm sure after our book comes out, hopefully by the next year, that I'm going to have a lot of slack on things of how other people, organizers, has done their events and everything, and that's okay. I'm ready for that. I've been through some good times and bad times organizing events, and I just want to let people know that there are good times and bad times. So, but yeah, I'm ready for it. So,
and I think disagreements are good.
Yeah.
Really, if you think, and if everybody thought just like you did, God, how boring would that be?
I know.
So I think that's what creates conversation and disagreements, and arguments were a difference of opinion, not a battle royal.
That is
I don't know.
true.
That's just me living my little life here in the mountains, foothills.
Oh, well, I envied you. I love being in the mountains. I lived in Colorado for 8 years. I moved back to the plains, and it's kind of like boring. So I try to make it. So, any other questions you have, Wendy, before we let our guests go?
No, Sam, I just wish you the best luck and health, and a good festival coming up. And I always enjoy reading your stuff on Facebook. You're on Facebook as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just, yeah.
It's good seeing you again. It's kind of nice to have those reconnections, and thanks for inviting me on. And if you're into metal magic, get the book. You don't want it's available on Amazon, Kindle. You can I can give you a signed one. You want to order it through the website, but it's take a few minutes and look around your house and look at all the metal that you have access to, and then imagine if you had some of that pulling the rope in the same direction, right? As an ally.
Right.
I think we've lost touch with part of ourselves.
Yeah.
You look at any of the lore from any part of the global written society, because we don't know what happened in the Americas because nothing was written down, right? But any of those, they've got there's a very high concentration of magic metal, whether it's a singing sword or a magic shield, or the weapon used to kill someone, now absorbed their soul, so it came stronger because you've got that added benefit. So I mean, I think it's important because it's a part of us physically, and
Right.
I think it has enabled me to be more whole and recognize deficiencies, right? Because when right? So when you're lacking something, what you need to add in, versus I don't know what to do, because it gives you that knowledge, that understanding, and knowledge is power, right? So I encourage you, to at least check it out. You may not like it, and that's okay,
Oh, you may love it too.
or you may love it, and it becomes, I've had people that have started reading the book and just said, "Oh, I've been waiting for this." And then, I've had other people that read it. Yeah, it's, that's interesting. Yeah, it's not my thing. And that, I'm okay with both, we don't all have to, like the same thing. We need to get off that train, you know.
Right.
All right, I'm off my
Right.
soapbox. Sorry, I get on it pretty
That's
quick.
okay.
That's
That's
okay.
When you're in community as long as we've been, you see stuff and you go, "What are you thinking?"
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've been through the witch wars. I'm like, you know what? We just, you know, what's the object of the exercise? You know, what are you trying to do? You know, but how powerful is it, you know, if you want to ward your house and use your keys, right? Because they're metal,
That is a
Right.
cool thing. Yeah.
you
It
know,
is.
and then you put it in a lock, right? And turn it to activate it. And now you're doing, I mean, you're doing witchcraft with metal. You know, you get in a box of metal and drive. You know, wouldn't it be
Right.
cool, you know, if that was an ally, you know, and it kept, you know, it was an active participant in your journey versus just something
Right.
you put gas and oil in, right?
That's
I mean, there's, like I said, there's so much surroundings. My beloved uses it when she cooks. You know, her pots and pans are allies to help create a tasty, healthy meal, right? You know, I mean, it's crazy. We're literally surrounded by it, and we don't see it. Our home is surrounded in copper, right? Because it runs the electricity, you know, in the house. And how cool is it to connect to that energy, you know, and use that. I don't know. Like I said, I'm on my soapbox. I'm passionate about it. We'll be here for days.
Yes.
You know, right there, we learned a lot in just that few seconds there. You know,
Right.
So we really did, and that's what this podcast is about. Is we tried to educate everybody.
Well,
So,
and you know, and for me, it really leveled up my witchcraft.
yeah.
Right. I mean, it leveled up that. It just because it took it in an area that was, you know, a bunch of unknowns and gave me an avenue of exploration, you know, to where I'm not spoon fed information, you know, because if you want to do a love spell, you know, you do it on this day with this crystal and these herbs and, you know, yada, 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 you know, whereas this isn't, you know, like I said, I'm enough of a chaos witch where I like it because I can experiment and plan and go, oh, well, that really didn't work out at all like I wanted to do. you know what? But you know, I learned what not to do, which is important. You know, I mean, you got to learn what not to do sometimes. You know, we just want to know what to do.
We do have a comment from the audience. Let me see. From Ashley, she says, I like that connection to our vehicle. There are individuals who will name their vehicles, and it's more than just a means of transportation.
Yeah,
So,
totally. I mean, I named mine. When I was in high school, man, I had a VW bus, you know, and I had a name for it. You know.
Well, Sam, it was a pleasure to have you. You know, it's more than a pleasure; it's an honor to have you.
Well, thank you.
You know, I wish you the best in health and the workshops and everything in life, and tell your beloved thank you for sharing you today with us, especially with 2 other women. But you know, to the audience, share, like, subscribe, please, and maybe we might have Sam on again. You never know what will happen. You know,
Maybe we'll do a little workshop. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, well, we got lots of secrets and mysteries inside the cauldron. Maybe we have you come on for a men's and witchcraft. You could talk to my husband and other male witches and see.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
that'd
Yeah,
be
because I mean,
fun.
it's one of those things where it's very female dominant.
Yeah,
You know,
it is.
and
It
not
is.
that there's anything wrong with it. I don't, you know, I kind of like females. You know, you know, but you know, when you think of witch, that's the first thing you think of, right?
Yeah, it is. That's why we have those men in witchcraft and chats, and even women in witchcraft, because we want people to know that it's just not women, you know. So, but thank you again. Just stay with us for a couple of minutes while we just end the live. And I just want to say thank you to the audience for being here today and tune in. We're taking a week off the podcast, and we see you on the 8th. And take care, many blessings, and happy, safe 4th of July. Be safe, but have fun. Families,
y'all.
everything. And blessings.
Blessings.